So the talk's going to be on participatory research for autism projects. So I'm going to talk about it from the researcher's perspective, although I am autistic as well. And Sophie's going to talk about it from the personal experience perspective. So we split it into two halves. So for this half, we'll talk about what participatory research is, so that nobody's confused, why it's important for research projects that want to look at the autistic community, how to make arrangements, how it then benefits the project, and using focus groups instead of one-on-one participatory research. And then we'll go on to Sophie's section. So looking at what participatory research is, it's basically when you want to look at a community that is hard to reach or not very well known, and you involve one of your participants from the community as an actual research assistant. So they don't then act in the research as a participant. They might have if you hadn't recruited them, but it's basically just about selecting somebody from your sample to be on the project as a researcher, influencing the research that's happening. So you should then really include this person as much as you possibly can. They might not be there from the very beginning, but from the point that you take them on, they should definitely be involved in as many decisions and outcomes of the research as possible. And the aim is just to make better research for the community you're looking at. So when we look at autism, often there's a lot of conflicting ideas between the autistic community and the research community. One example, which Kate's going to look at when she does her talk on genetics, is that geneticists often want to know what causes autism. And the autistic community are very concerned about what that could then be used for. Might people then try and cure autism or get rid of autism? So having somebody on the research team just narrows the chance of anything negative for the community happening. So it's very important, especially if you're going to look at something a bit controversial or that you're not too sure of. However, it shouldn't be tokenism. And this isn't necessarily research teams doing something bad, just sometimes research teams get overly focused on how can we do this properly, and they recruit somebody, they put them on the paper, but they either forget to ask their opinions on important decisions, or they ask their opinions and then just choose not to listen to them anyway. So the ideal way is for it to be a negotiation process. So for example, I would take something to Sophie and see what she says. Now she might recommend a completely new methodology, which we might not be able to do within the confines of the study, but what we can then do is negotiate a way around that that's still comfortable for what she wants for the community, but that is still covering our research in the right way. And it does vary by research team, so it's especially important if the entire research team in neurotypical, because it's just highly likely they don't understand the nuances of behaviour and attitudes that the community have. But also, we decided to do it even though we had myself as an autistic researcher leading the research, because you just become engrossed in your work. You're so used to the data and making things friendly that you often miss things that somebody else will come in and see instantly. So getting Sophie in was important for that, because often I was distracted with things that Sophie was then able to focus on and make sure that every single part of the research was friendly for our participants. So there is a starter pack on participatory research from UCL at London, and it was put together by Cray, and it's basically telling people how to do participatory research in the best way possible. And one of the best quotes from this was by Sanders in 2002, and it's that participatory research is a mindset and an attitude about people. It's the belief that all people have something to offer, so it's not about getting caught up in the methods that you use. It's not about focusing on, okay, exactly how we use this person. It's about thinking this person's got something to offer, let's use that as best as we can and just going with it with a natural flow.
Because I think you've definitely, with me, there's just been times where you've just kind of let me loose a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the important part. So why it's important to do is you're giving the community a say over what gets researched and how it's conducted. So then the community has a better view of your research team. It makes your participants as comfortable as possible. It rules out possibilities of uncomfortable environment where you're going to interview them or test them, and any methodologies that might put somebody into distress, things that a researcher wouldn't think about. So for example, when I was a participant before I became a researcher, a neurotypical researcher got me in and done a study where they just stroked your hand with a paintbrush, which then gave me a meltdown, but that's not something they would have anticipated. So when you're going to use autistic participants, it's just best to think about making it as best for your participants as possible.
I had one recently. I did a study. Luckily, it had been changed, and there was a loud noise because there was a sort of task where you had to inflate a balloon. And as soon as I was told there was like the balloon will pop, I asked how loud it's going to be, and I found out that prior to, she was autistic herself, the research assistant, prior to her being on the project, it was a very loud bang, which definitely would have put me into overload at the very least, if not a meltdown, to have a sudden bang. So it is really important because it doesn't filter through unless you've got someone on the team.
So it also then improves the understanding of the research team. So in your example, I imagine that the other researchers working with her then thought, okay, I didn't know that, but now they'll take that on for future projects. So even if you've got a different person assisting you with every project, you're taking that knowledge forward and making yourselves better researchers. And even with projects that have already got autistic researchers, it's just making sure that you're getting multiple autistic perspectives. If you came to the talks last time, we focused a lot on how different autistic people have completely different needs and skill sets. So having different voices is very, very valuable. And there are two ways to do participatory research. One way, which we're focusing on heavily, is to get somebody on board onto the team, which usually due to time restrictions or finance restrictions is just a single person. You can change that per project, but also you can use focus groups of people so that you're getting many different voices. And often researchers will use that at the beginning of a project when it's more crucial. And ultimately, you should hopefully produce an autism-friendly project where participants can feel comfortable coming into that research team and being part of the research as a participant. So the important thing is making the arrangements as comfortable as possible. So this is especially important if you would ever consider becoming an advisor on a project. And that's not necessarily just autistic people. Different projects have different needs. So sometimes they might want a carer as well, or instead of an autistic person. For example, if you want to study autistic children, maybe an autistic adult who can remember their prior experience would be helpful, but maybe a carer who's actively got an autistic child and is constantly engaged in that every day will value being on that project. So things to consider, first of all, are the skills of the person you're recruiting and their training needs. So before we had Sophie, we did have somebody else contact us and wanted to be on the project, and we got it through ethics, we got them in. They were somebody who was interested in science, but a different domain. And the problem was that their skill set was purely in numbers and statistical analyses, which is great for some projects. But for the project we were doing, it was all about interviews and subjective analysis. So the training demand just went very, very high compared to what we were expecting because there was so much to go through. We had to train them on interviews, the software we use for that, and then how to do the analysis. And ultimately that person just didn't feel comfortable doing it because it didn't match their skill set. And what you then don't want is for the person to start feeling incompetent or like they're not good enough to be on the project. So we then just renegotiated and offered to help them find a different position in a study or a department that was more suited to them. And then we found Sophie, who was already a psychology student. I don't know if you'd ever done qualitative research before.
I'd never done qualitative, but I was familiar with doing interviews myself from a participant perspective. But in terms, because Melissa taught me how to use the software that we use, the type of analysis, I was familiar with a different type of qualitative analysis to the one that we've been using. So she trained me up in how to do that, just a lot of good practice and research and qualitative research, which then did feed into other things I did.
I think it's important to say that you don't necessarily need that prior knowledge. Some people are just more skills at different things, and it's all about the project as well. So some projects will take on somebody who's never had experience with research and will spend a lot of time working on that. I think we just had more time restrictions with it being a PhD project, and it did make it easier that we got through the training process quite smoothly. It wasn't necessarily about the time it took. I think if you'd taken longer, it would have been completely fine. It was more that you had that obvious confidence in yourself as a researcher that worked well. And another important thing is whether they like the project. So if it's not something that they're comfortable with, then they might not enjoy it enough to give what you want from them. And it's not about getting somebody who's going to love the project and just say yes to everything that you tell them. It's about getting somebody that appreciates what you're doing enough to get in there and tell you what's not right and what works better. And if somebody's not interested, they're just not going to do that. They might be overly critical or they might just not engage whatsoever. So you want that right balance between the person and the individual. So what is right for one person your next project might need a completely different individual altogether. Another important thing is what you can offer in return. So Autistic is a charity that look into this a lot, making sure researchers are being friendly to autistic communities, and they really push for financial reimbursement, which is only fair. It's something that I've regretted about the project, is that we've not been able to offer finance, just because on a PhD you're limited to what finances you have access to, and you don't get funding for this type of stuff. So what we decided was to find somebody who wanted experience, and we would then offer them whatever they wanted. Just opened it right up and said, you're in complete control of the stuff that you want to do and the stuff that you don't want to do. In exchange, we're giving you the experience, but because you're doing it for free, then you can just get involved in whatever you want. So originally...
It's been very nice, because especially being a student as well, like, I can only fit, and especially every semester my timetable changes, so I can say, so this semester I'll be in this afternoon, and then it's flexible when I've got deadlines and more work, or when I'm maybe more tired and things like that. So it's been really nice. And then there's been certain things which I'm really happy to do, and other things I'm like, yeah, no, you're not paying me for this.
Quite funny, because actually I was never going to ask you to do transcribing or data input, because I thought that's the stuff that people don't like.
See, I'll do
But
it.
that was the stuff that you love doing, so we just worked
I
around it
really
that
enjoy
way.
the experience. I think that's, for me, I was definitely looking for, because we get a lot of what we call quantitative in research, which is numbers, but for me, moving forward into what I want to do in research, I want to do qualitative projects. So for me, it was really good to get that qualitative experience, especially knowing I had an upcoming assignment which would be qualitative in nature. So I went into that feeling much more prepared as a result of that.
But what you do want is for them to be as similar to your sample as possible, so somebody you would have otherwise selected as your participant. For example, if you're looking at autistic people who are minimally verbal or who've got verbal difficulties, you probably want somebody who either is experiencing that now or has done in the past, or a carer of somebody who's experiencing that now, if you can't accommodate the communication in other ways. What you don't want is somebody that's never experienced verbal difficulties, regardless of whether they are autistic. You're then not going to be able to precisely match the needs of your participants. So it's always about considering who's the best person for your project. And I think keeping the environment autism friendly is a big one. So making sure that no one's going to wear very potent perfume on the days when your advisor's coming in, and trying to keep the sounds in the area down as much as possible. For us, it was difficult because we had an open plan office, which is just how it works for the PhD students, not autism friendly at all. But again, I think that was something we were just very open with in communication, and making sure Sophie knew that she could work from home. There was no demand for her to be in the office if we were doing stuff, because that could have potentially been
It's fine, I've got access to a kettle.
So looking then at how it benefits a project, we weren't able to look at project aims because with it being a PhD project, it's a different process. You have to decide what you're doing before you even consider this kind of stuff. If you were putting in for funding for a big research project, you could get somebody in from that level and see what should we look at, and then once you've picked an area, what specific questions should we form. But what we did was got Sophie in once that part was already sorted out. And instead, we got her involved in the ethics process, so advertising, study design, and we really benefited from that in ways that I'll show in a moment. And for us, the important part as well was the analysis. So with qualitative analysis especially, it's heavily important to have two people looking at the data to make sure that you're really interpreting the responses correctly. If somebody said something in an interview, do they mean what they've said or do they mean something else? So often you'd have a few different researchers involved, and we do have neurotypical researchers that look over everything we've done. But for us, it was important to have two autistic people reading that and making sure that the participants were being understood correctly. And then dissemination. So if you got on board with helping set up these talks just to improve autistic understanding in the community, and also in planning podcasts and other types of outreach once we've got research done. So this is an example of where Sophie's input helped. So the white poster was the original poster, and it was just because we were in the midst of a huge project which was made up of about 4 or 5 studies in total, and this was about the third in the lineup, so we'd gone through the ethics process so many times. We were focused on getting rooms that were autism friendly, making sure that the design was autism friendly, and at this point I had spent so long trying to track down a theory of mind test that was going to be sensible and comfortable for all of our participants. So the poster just got completely overlooked, and it was just about getting all the information on a page. The first problem was the language, so we always use autistic because we value identity first. We know that that's what the community prefer, but we also know that neurotypical people, first of all, they don't tend to recognise the word neurotypical. Often they don't recognise non-autistic, they just see autistic and think that's not something I can be involved in. So to try and draw them in, we also put without autism because that's the language they use most. But that became an accessibility issue that we wanted to change in a new poster. So then we got Sophie involved, who helped us to break down the information into chunks that would be easier to read.
I think that's where I've probably been as honest with you as the poster design out of everything.
But that's where we needed you.
That's not okay. I'm sick of seeing research because, especially in the psychology department, we see lots of posters and they're just pages of text and you just get fed up reading them. Whereas having even just a little bit of colour in it in sort of boxed off, I mean, maybe that's personal preference, but I think it works better.
Yeah, we decided on adding colour, and then you inputted that we use pastel colours just so that it wasn't harsh on anybody who's got like migraines or any sort of visual cognitive difficulties. And Sophie also inputted the QR codes to make it instantly accessible to a student. That was another value of Sophie not only being autistic but also being a student, was that she knew how quickly students wanted information, how they wanted to access the study instead of going off and sending an email. So that's gotten us a lot more responses that way. So as well as using somebody on your project, you can also use a focus group. And like I said, Autistic is focused on this kind of thing a lot. So they have the insight groups, which is autistic people who they pay for their time. So it's very fair, and you go to Autistica and you say, I want X amount of people from these demographics, ideally, and I want them to help influence my project. And ideally, you would start before you develop a project, and then you would keep going back to them regularly. So what we decided to do, because there was no option at the time for us to access this for free, was to use our participants. Obviously, we asked their permission completely. One example of this was for study 2, the research team wanted to do a project on reading aloud, which is where a researcher comes in and reads a piece of text to you, and you listen and you interpret that. So with our first group of participants from the first study, we just asked them about this. We explained what we wanted to do, and most of them told us that this was completely inaccessible, that they would feel patronised, they wouldn't be able to engage with the task.
I think I told you I wouldn't sign on.
Yeah, and then we came up with using audio files instead, so pre-recorded reading aloud sessions. The participants did ideally just want the text only without any audio input, but we explained to them that with the type of thing we were looking at, that audio input was very important, but we could remove the person in the room talking to them basically. And we've had quite a lot of engagement with that study now because it's become so autism friendly as a result. So now I'm gonna hand over to Sophie. You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you can ship in as well.
Okay.
So I think obviously it's really important to have projects that use an advisor, but it's a lot of time to give, I must admit it is. As much as I can give as much or as little as I want, it's still time and energy, which I probably should be using on other things, but I really do enjoy it and value it. And I think there's so much I've got out of it just from things from just personally, academically, obviously being a student, researcher skills is fantastic to develop as early as possible. But there's also been benefits just being an autistic person myself, and also the projects are around reading, and I have been an avid reader since as long as I can remember. So even the type of project, like what Melissa was saying about enjoying the project, it really matters to me because it's something that I love. And I won't let her do something that's I don't agree with. So personal benefits. Melissa's become a great friend. And also there's a lot of networking, so I've become very connected within the autism community. Doing talks like this as well has helped, and also with other researchers, which puts me in a really good position for the future. And
Sorry, I think that's as well, just to mention, because we do try and take anyone involved in the project to conferences, to events that we're going to make sure that they're getting that networking experience if they want to be involved on future projects or through their own research as well.
We've had some conference adventures, haven't we?
Yeah.
And just general life experience. So as much as open plan offices aren't autism friendly, or I think people friendly, really, it's also a good experience because that's maybe the environment I'd end up in. So it's good for me to get used to that, and it's also sort of dipping your toe in early, because it's like, if it's too much I can go home or just only do a couple of days a week. So it's just good to sort of generally get a feel for that environment, and just stuff which isn't involved in specifically to research. There's a lot of just general planning, organising, which is just really good experience to have, and it's nice to do. And I've done a lot of research as a participant, even before I was an advisor, something I've been doing even before I was at uni. And one of the things I love, especially about doing qualitative projects, is you'll be asked questions you've never thought of. Like, you've never sat down and asked yourself before. And it definitely makes you think. And so there's a lot of things that I've gained from every single bit of research that I've done. I've gone and learnt something about myself. And I just think that's really nice, to come out of things and be more self-aware. And also, we know that a lot of things come out about the best things are being useful, that's why people volunteer and things. But it's really nice to because we've spent hours in the office working on things, and it's really nice to get to the end of it. It's a really nice feeling to have everything done or see something completed. And that's a really good just emotional boost. And it's nice to feel useful. I feel very useful. And awareness of what research is going on. So again, like what Melissa was saying earlier, there's a lot of controversy within research that happens in autism. There's definitely conflicting views with projects that are autism friendly, like the one we're doing, and then ones that definitely don't have that input, which haven't listened to the community. But it's definitely given me a feel of what's actually going on. And you hear a lot of horror stories and things about, especially more past research before things like ethics and things were in place. So it's nice to know what's going on in research, and also how it's actually being used and what it's influencing. Obviously, there's been so many academic benefits. So personally, I do want to go into research with autistic people and families. So it's been very relevant for me to be on a project with autistic people. And having that experience specific to my area is just an immense help for the future. I can put that down on a CV and say, I've done this. And how long have I been your intern now?
A year, I would guess.
It's
maybe
definitely
more.
been about a year.
I know you've done 2 projects. Well, you've done 1 project, you're on 1 actively, and then there's another upcoming one.
Yeah.
And then 1 which is just quantitative, which you would just get somebody to oversee.
So that's a lot of things I can put down, a lot of experience that I've got. And I really like learning. That's probably why I've signed up to uni and future studies. And so there'll be things that I learn. So even transcription, which might not feel very academic at times, it's sometimes nice to be realistically to know how long it takes to type up what someone said in an interview into a Word document. And also definitely my writing skills improved since working on project, because it's reading more about things, doing more things. And one of the things that I've definitely got, other than payment, which I definitely value at the moment, is Melissa has basically helped me with my own degree. She gets sent everything to proofread and just general questions and going into crisis. And again, that negotiation of you doing that for me, it's definitely better for where I'm at now. Money's not as important as someone telling me if this is good or not, especially if she's been through it herself. So, thank you.
Okay.
And so, I don't like you for how you've changed how I read. I used to just read books, and I used to enjoy them, reread them if I enjoyed them. Now I sit and analyse, why do I like this character? Why do I read this genre? Why am I reading more non-fiction at the moment than fiction? I don't read how I used to read, because I've read so many things now about how people engage with reading, why people choose different things, what people like about things. So I love reading fantasy books and seeing why certain people don't like fantasy books, or the same shared love for different things and different types of fantasy. And it's really nice. And also you get a lot of book recommendations. I think we've both got.
That's been my favourite thing.
It's been really nice to just see people getting really excited about the book the way that I would personally. So some of my favourite books I've read 15 odd times, and I can talk about them all day because I love them, and it's been really nice to know other people have those experiences.
Yeah.
And then you end up with a list of well, someone really, really enjoyed that, and you sort of get a feel if they read similar books throughout an interview. So I'll get there eventually. And even though projects have been about reading that I've definitely been on, there's been stuff, a lot of people have ended up speaking about their own experiences being autistic in our interviews, and I think that's been really nice what we found.
We had a whole section on like prosopagnosia, which is face blindness, which I think we'd never stopped and thought about the different types that present and the different ways it changes. Yeah, that's definitely
and that was just asking people not directly about it, and that's one of the enjoyable things about doing research, is so much comes out of it. But I find like I definitely struggle with facial recognition, and it's that not feeling alone. So definitely like why we do these talks and stuff, and people have come back to me and I've gone back to people and said, it's nice to know someone else experiences that. And even in a research setting, that's something I've got a lot of, which is, it's nice, even for the stuff which I sort of class as more negative experiences I go through. It's like, you wish other people didn't have them, but it's also nice to know you aren't alone in that. And sort of going more back to what I was saying about seeing research projects, different ones, it's nice to see the ones that are research friendly. So like we went to a talk similar to this by a researcher from down in UCL, and it was just nice to see that it is going on, that autistic people, that we are being included in things and that we are helping shape what is happening to our future through research, and knowing that it is making a difference. Because that is important. There's definitely more of a focus now on things being done, which the community wants.
So we weren't expecting the weather to be quite as warm, so we did leave quite a long section for questions, just because we felt it was better to answer people's questions than to keep giving more information. But there's our contact details if anyone's got any questions that they don't want to ask now, or in case they think of something later on. But if you've got any questions, feel free to ask now.
We do also have them written down as well.